Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, shunters, punters and hound hunters, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And you join me on another wintry and mist-riddled Friday here in the north of Britain. If you did that, there is a small sort of stream that runs just adjacent to the road that runs adjacent to our house. And there is a bridge, obviously, that connects the end to end, so people can cross that stream. It's got a little wooden floor, essentially, over which any would-be citizen would go across. And of course, that has been made a little slippery by the mist and all of the continual cold of the morning. And so, separate parts of my morning, whether it was the early bit of reading or the decoction of libations, whether that was making my coffee, whether that was eating my morning croissant, or whether that was, catching up on the news, every little now and then I would hear a whoop, and then 45 minutes would go by, whoop, and I wondered what on earth's going on. So if indeed you do hear that noise at any point, do not worry, that is just the sound of an innocent citizen's femur splitting into three. So we won't worry about that. There are immense injuries going on over there now. I'm not going to cross it today because it will, as I'm sure you're aware, it will be injurious and it will claim my life. Nonetheless, folks, you join me for our final instalment of Victober. I believe this is to be number 8. The Victober event whereby both content creators and consumers are not so much appealed to, but socially compelled to read Victorian literature. And today's no different. We have in this rather glorious edition, as I'm sure you will agree, the complete stories of Sherlock Holmes, complete with original illustrations from the Strand magazine. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, first story coming out, don't quote me on this, in the 1890s with A Study in Scarlet, and he was then, the stories then became so very, very popular that he published almost innumerable short stories, all of which are pretty excellent. The eponymous Holmes here, a sort of a pensive, pipe-smoking, mantelpiece-dwelling sort of thinker that both that needs a room one day, and then Dr. John Watson, who is fresh from Afghanistan, I want to say, or fresh from combat, who is living on the terrible pension of a ex-military man who needs some cheap rooming, and a mutual brings Dr. John Watson and Mr. Sherlock Holmes together at 221B Baker Street. That's all of the procession done. So a few myths about Mr. Holmes. First of all, it is said quite often that he is a cold and emotionless automaton with no capacity for empathy, or he's a little bit unfeeling. And that's said of him. I have never really I've seen that in the cinematic adaptations, but I've never really found that much in these books or in these pages. He is always always personable and affable, and will quite often set somebody down in a chair and is very willing to stroke their ego for a little while. And I think he is much more emotionally adept than lots of people give him credit for. He is obviously known as being a little bit also sturdy and reliable and sort of unflappable and infallible. This is of course wrong. He especially in the first novel, A Study in Scarlet, Conan Doyle makes it obvious that he is very much in need of flattery. So when Watson's going, "Good Lord, how did you know that I was in Afghanistan? You're amazing, sir. This is like magic. This is an illusion." He needs that flattery and loves it. And yeah, he isn't somebody that he's very individualistic. You sense that there's a little bit of an inferiority complex coming in there. Not that I'm going to psychologically diagnose him, but that's another myth that I would like to bust. Also, there's one about him being a sort of supercilious intellectual hawk. It's always said to be sort of hawkish and, a little bit condescending. That very, very rarely comes across either. He's willing to help prime ministers and presidents, and also, the so-called socioeconomically lowest of society as well, whether you're just some building proprietor, or you're some somebody that separates wheat from chaff, or whatever the hell, you know, somebody of low living did in those days. He's equally happy to help the highs and the lows. So a few myths that I find that aren't, that don't particularly exist much when you actually give them a close reading. So I read I read all sorts this week. I read Study in Scarlet. I read A Hound of the Baskervilles, which are probably the two most known novels, which I always enjoy. And then I read some of the short stories that I haven't looked in. I've read it all within the space of about 3 or 4 years, having had it for quite some time. But I read, from the adventures, I read A Case of Identity, The 5 Orange Pips, The Engineer's Thumb, The Noble Bachelor, The Beryl Coronet, and then from the memoirs I read The Yellow Face, The Stockbroker's Clerk, The Reigate Squires. I reread Scandal in Bohemia and A Second Stain. I read His Last Bow, and then from the case book I read The Blanched Soldier, The Three Garadepes, The Lion's Mane, The Veiled Lodger, and The Retired Colourman. All of which I found to be, you know, they're very, very cosy and very, very enjoyable. But there are a few Doylean motifs that I want to talk about on here as well. The first of which is he will often start, especially a short story, with a longish paragraph shrouding mysteriously some of the untold Holmesian stories. So a typical paragraph, I mean, I might as well just flick to one, but a typical paragraph would begin, it was that those wintry months of December and January, and yada, 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 and then there will be, Holmes had been busy in that case in Egypt, that strange event with the Egyptian pharaoh, and then there was then there was the adventure in Germany with with that fountain. And then there was that terrible man with 4 legs that came across one day holding that woman's head. Oh, what a curious adventure that was. And you think, Doyle, you know, why are you bothering about provincial England? Tell us about the 4-legged man that walked in with a beheaded woman or whatever. That he is very, 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 very good at just sort of coaxing you, at just tickling you around the short and curlies and making you want a little more, and wondering what it is that Conan Doyle didn't, or what it is that Watson, who is obviously the person that details Holmes's events, what the nature of the stuff that Watson didn't commit to memory and didn't immortalise by documenting them down. So that's always very good, because you often hear as well of stories that have only been written, have been written 2 years hence, because they're shrouded in secrecy. A Scandal in Bohemia being one of them. You also get, at the start of A Study in Scarlet, Watson collates a list of strengths and weaknesses of Holmes, and you get a constant allusion by Watson to apparently Holmes's canonical ignorance in regards to literature. He is purportedly, not very cognizant of, you know, whatever, Balzac, Homer, what the quintessential learned man about town would have known about then. Holmes is apparently curiously ignorant. He only likes sort of the lurid tales of criminal wrongdoing, but again, we immediately know that not to be true, because he references Balzac and Rousseau and many other people. But here is, I've just highlighted the list that Watson draws up of Holmes's strengths and weaknesses. Sherlock Holmes, His Limits, that's what it's titled. Knowledge of literature, nil. Knowledge of philosophy, nil. Knowledge of astronomy, nil. Knowledge of politics, feeble. Knowledge of botany, variable. I won't go into that. Knowledge of geology, practical but limited. Knowledge of chemistry, profound. Knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense. He appears to know every detail of every horror perpetrated in the century. Number 10, plays the violin well. 11 is an expert single-stick player, boxer and swordsman. And 12 has a good practical knowledge of British law. So, yeah, you're fed this idea that Holmes has never read, you know, what else might have been circulating in the 1890s. Lots of Austen, presumably, would have been read. Lots of Dickens. Apparently has no knowledge of that. But with his immense moralising at the end of every tale, you soon realise that Holmes obviously has read all that stuff. But yeah, another motif that I would like to highlight would be that the adventures very often concern invariably often a middle-aged man who has gone abroad and made his fortune by transgressing in foreign lands, and then is surprised one day when those foreign transgressions follow him home. And the amount of tales in which Watson and Holmes are summoned to a gentrified area and the office of some sort of rich man that's now just living off what he's earned in the past, and he has a harpoon, either a harpoon or some sort of Zulu spear thrust through his chest, and then Holmes realises that, of course, that he's raped and pillaged a village and punched the local chief in the face, and they've all come back to haunt him. That's a very constant thing. So you have the dancing men, whereby one of the sort of attachments to the head crime family in Chicago is hunting a woman that was promised to him, who happens to live in England, and they're communicating via figures of dancing men. You have A Study in Scarlet, whereby there are references to Utah and the foundation of the Church of Latter-day Saints and Mormonism, so a lot goes on in America that follows back to England. There's the tale of Black Peter and his piratical transgressions as a pirate captain, essentially, or as a ship leader. What else is there? Also, there is the Crooked Man, when a sort of 50 or 60 year long feud surrounded by the Indian mutiny of the British colonies. That's worked up as well. You have the Sign of Four, which is involved again in the Indian mutiny and stuff that went on with passing along treasure. So there's this leitmotif that you can clearly tell that Doyle is using Victorian expansionism and globalism to his advantage. It was all these tales. He himself was a Greenland. He was on board a ship that was involved in Greenland whaling. So he's very used to expansionism and knows about the imperialist powers that was Britain at the time. So yeah, a lot of stuff is involved in foreign stuff, essentially. Another motif that I want to pick up on would be the matters of disguise that are often used. So either it's Holmes that's wrapping himself up in a shawl, or is making himself out. He almost inevitably makes himself out to look like a ruffian. So he either puts on a big beard in order to sort of penetrate someone's intimate circle, if you'll pardon my phraseology. He will sort of try and infiltrate a certain place that is obviously essential to his investigations by dressing up. Or, in a case of identity, for example, a criminal will assume the character, the appearance and deportment of somebody else, so as to, further their evil means or try and trick Holmes. One example of Holmes disguising himself is in A Scandal in Bohemia, the first adventure involving Irena Adler, where he dresses up as a harmless clerical man and is then left guided into the room. So that's all very clever. And then, obviously, as I say, A Case of Identity is a good example of when one of the criminals hides himself. Another motif would be his affability and his personability. So it is often used by Doyle quite successfully to show just how feeling Holmes is. He will often there are two stories in particular that really cement how sometimes his emotion leads him to work outside of the law. So you have the Devil's Foot, when it's clear that somebody has actively murdered, has sought to do bad in order to do good, and he lets him off. Again, there is in The Blue Carbuncle, somebody that's taken a very valuable gem from somebody who lives in a hotel, James Ryder, and then Holmes bangs him to rights and says that a man will hang if you do not admit it, and then he obviously admits it. And then all of a sudden he says, well, get out. He takes the moral high ground, but he doesn't put the bracelets on him or anything like that. So he does let a criminal go very often. So he isn't, doesn't live in close company with the law. He is a law unto himself often, which is really nice. And then also, finally, one of the motifs is frankly, disastrous and useless detective that he comes across. You have Lestrade, who is the pick of the bunch. He's perfectly fine, but still makes mistakes. You have Gregson and a whole cadre of others who could not investigate their way out of a wet paper bag. They are demonstrably terrible, and obviously Doyle is just railing against some of the ill-placed detectives at the time. They will descend on a country house and arrest the maid, the butler, the gardener, and the Alsatian, all in one sitting. And Holmes and Watson will be laughing at this while it happens, and then we'll prove them wrong afterwards. And you also have the immense disparity between this obvious idiocy by the investigators and the way in which they are produced, the way in which they are represented in the newspapers. Because of course, Scotland Yard want their people in their employ to seem to be what might you say, purveyors of morality and excellent employees, and so you have this absolutely useless idiot who is praised continually in the press, and Holmes gets next to no praise for that either. So yeah, all of which is very good. Some of the ones that I'd not noticed before, as I mentioned, was the missing three-quarter, which involves a rugby player that goes missing. That one's very good. And yeah, I don't think I'd read that one before. And also the three students, which is really remarkable, sort of campus drama, really, whereby three students are set to translate Thucydides the next day, and one of the core text to the translation is stolen the night before, and then Holmes has to go and see which of the three has taken it. Again, very good. But I was thinking, my absolute all-time favourite story in here is The Second Stain. And I was thinking how little credit Conan Doyle gets for being quite feministic often in his writings. So The Second Stain involves the Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary turning up at 221B Baker Street one morning to say that a document that is laden with all sorts of socio-political foreign connotations has been taken from the Foreign Secretary's dispatch box overnight. There is next to no evidence as to why that has been taken, and they come to Holmes saying that if the details of the document are popularised and publicised and made well generally known, then it's curtains for Britain and we're going to be at war, which is a foreshadowing of what is to come in the next 10 or 15 years in Britain and in Europe. And it is through Lady Hilda, Trelawney Hope, who is the Foreign Secretary, Lady Hilda, his wife, who is much more intricately involved in it than we are first led to believe. So yeah, Doyle is very good at showing, first of all, the arrant malevolence in treating 50% of the population different to the way in which you would treat the other 50% of the population. So the only reason that Lady Hilda becomes involved is because she's being blackmailed by a foreign associate who wants the letter of Trelawney Hope's dispatch box and can't take herself. Essentially, he's got hold of a publicly ruinous document of her, the love letters of a hapless young woman, and seeks to blackmail her so as to obtain the letter. And the only reason that the exchange takes place is because she doesn't sufficiently trust her husband's reasoning so as to completely open up with him, and so has to go on all sorts of escapes of deceit, and inevitably, obviously, the document becomes lost. And then, of course, right at the end, when Holmes figures out why the exchange has taken place, Trelawney Hope comes in and everything's resolved. And then the Prime Minister says, Holmes then goes to Miss Hilda Hope and obtains the letter again, and it's put back in the dispatch box, and everyone's amazed. Oh my God, we thought it was all over Europe, and now it's actually just been in this living room the whole time. There is a small moment where the Prime Minister, once all the felicitations have taken place, says to Holmes, "This doesn't seem right. This stinks." And Holmes just says, "Well, we've got our own diplomatic secrets there," and then walks out. So the conversations between the politicians and Holmes and Watson are excellent, and of course you have that very effective yet very subtle and very timid young woman that is completely thrust between a rock and a hard place, which he's excellent at, which Doyle is excellent at evoking. It's the same with, well, not quite the same, with Irena Adler in A Scandal in Bohemia. She's known and immortalised as the woman by Holmes from that moment on, because she's the only person throughout most of the stories that foresees what Holmes is going to do and flees abroad, and so he can't help the king. But yes, anyway, I'm drivelling on. This concludes our Victober series. I've really enjoyed these. These are so homely and cosy, and Jeremy Brett's cinematic, well, the ITV 90s cinematic adaptations using Jeremy Brett or Huggins as the primary Holmes was really excellent, and I'm constantly every Sunday morning clicking those on an ITV. So yes, I think that just about concludes today's video, folks. I hope you enjoyed Victober. We've read quite a lot, and it's going to be the same for Non-Fiction November. Hopefully I'll have the TBR out soon. So yeah, that'll be jolly good. But yes, thank you ever so much for watching BookTube. Oh, let me know what it is your favourite Sherlock Holmes stories are. I suspect you won't go for the second staying, because it's not ever so popular. But the Blue Carbuncle is a famous one, where a jewel ends up in someone's gullet, in a goose's gullet. But yeah, tell me which one your favourite Holmes is. I want to know and I want to discuss. But yeah, thank you ever so much for watching BookTube. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.